Buckle up, this is going to be a good one.
Canada be damned. I'm going to the Klondike.
The Klondike is Canada.
Giorgio, you be doing just fine, brother.
On the 30th anniversary, okay, technically it was weeks ago, but it's only been a couple of days since writing this. Still, being the same year, we're at the 30-year mark since one of the most adventurous movies of the 90s was released. This movie, I'm sure you know from the title and the thumbnail, is The Rocketeer. There are several reasons why I wanted to cover this movie outside of the anniversary. This anniversary, once I realized when it was, simply pushed things forward in the queue. But before we get into the reasons, let's get into what The Rocketeer is about. The Rocketeer tells the story of young pilot Cliff Secord, who happens to stumble upon a rocket pack prototype.
Open her up. Oh my. What do we got here?
With the help of his engineering roommate, Peavy, the duo test and upgrade the rocket pack and by happenstance, create a mysterious local flying folk hero known as the Rocketeer. Catching attention of both the FBI and film star Neville Sinclair with mobsters at his fingertips, Cliff must navigate the newfound situation carefully, for Secord and Sinclair share a common thread, by way of Jenny Blake, Cliff's girlfriend and Sinclair's castmate. Set in 1930s Los Angeles, The Rocketeer is a throwback love letter to old Hollywood, as well as the era. Although the plight of the Great Depression seems to be glossed over, in no way does it feel modernized. For some unknown reason, it maintains the feeling left over from the Roaring '20s. This is probably because it's a Disney film, and they wanted to keep things light. And don't get me wrong, I love what they did here, because it works. For both Cliff and Peavy, things are looking grim for them, after losing their plane at the top of the film.
You alright? You okay? Well, that's the end of that.
And the same goes for Jenny, with her inability to move up the ranks of Hollywood.
You know, your audition was so much better.
Irma, everybody's audition was better. Doesn't matter when you're the producer's niece.
So she gets to play a scene with Neville Sinclair, and we play scenery. I love Hollywood.
Yet there's never a sense by any of them that all hope is lost. They may be disappointed or frustrated, but at no point do they straight up quit. This positive attitude is what you want in a group of protagonists, and it is that perseverance and resilience that inspires all of those around them. In the midst of the depression, the Rocketeer himself reignites something within the public: hope. Not only does his introductory heroic act capture the heart of the public, but by doing it through never-before-seen means, it captures their imagination too. It's difficult not to get swept up in it too. The casting has a big part to play in all of this. For starters, our hero, Cliff, played by Billy Campbell, is kind of the perfect casting choice. He's completely believable as Cliff, a man who's both young and playful much of the time, yet adult and serious when called for. He may not be the tortured hero we've come to expect in today's films, but again, he's a throwback to a forgotten time. The near-flawless knight in shining armor of yesteryear may be a dated concept, yet Billy Campbell leans into it without making the Rocketeer a cheesy superhero. He does this by not making him above the common man. By being a freshman to the rocket, Cliff is often finding himself in situations where he hasn't fully worked out the kinks and is more of a bumbling fool than a superhero. this accessibility makes it even easier for us to get behind him. Cliff's right-hand man, Peavy, is also someone who's easy to get behind. Less of a dreamer and more of a pragmatist than Secord, Peavy is the audience's North Star. He has the drive and the imagination of youth, yet he also has the experience of age to bring Cliff back to Earth and think practically. Alan Arkin is someone I would never have imagined in this role, but after seeing it, it's difficult to imagine anyone else as Peavy. However, Arkin's dry, sarcastic delivery makes it clear why he was cast.
How do I look?
Like a hood ornament.
At them. What do you think was going on at the house?
House. We don't got a house, Clifford. We got a gazebo.
We don't do the clown act no more.
Clown act. Good thinking, Clifford. You just set us back about 4 years.
Killed in the tragedy when flaming debris fell on his touring car. That's terrible. That was a nice car.
In many ways, he's Cliff's Alfred to his Batman. This kind of role is something we've seen from Arkin before, and he thrives in it. Perhaps the juiciest role in The Rocketeer is that of Neville Sinclair, played by Timothy Dalton. Off the heels of his 80s James Bond, Dalton really sinks his teeth into the role of Sinclair. On the opposite side of things, being the villain, Dalton pulls out all of the stops to make this character charming, while setting it apart from Bond. The pompous actor, Sinclair, is Hollywood's toast of the town, and Dalton revels in the role. In fact, you could say Dalton has two Sinclairs to play. The Hollywood hotshot whose charm and fame grants him a table at the South Seas Club, and the secret, behind-closed-doors Sinclair, who talks with mobsters in his living room that looks like catacombs made of white stone. Both sides are different in their tones, but the narcissism that is the core of Sinclair is what bubbles to the surface with each side. This would be enough for a simple supervillain, but with the addition of being a top Hollywood elitist, it's actually a perfect fit.
Hey, Sinclair. If the feds get me, I'm taking you with me. I want to tell them everything.
Who do you think they'd believe? A cheap crook? Or the number 3 box office star in America?
Number 3 jerk!
By today's standards, there's elements of The Rocketeer which haven't aged well. Being a product of the time, some of those can't be helped, regardless of when it's made, with hindsight. The big element that did age well with The Rocketeer is the script, especially when you're talking about the plot. The Rocketeer does an amazing job of having an intricate plot with many moving parts, and yet it still moves at a steady pace that's easy to follow. Several characters and plot lines run parallel into the third act, and even though we have limited time with each of those, being under 2 hours, we're given enough to push everything forward without drag. This is all accomplished because all of the plot lines are layered and woven together. Like a castle made of playing cards, they're reliant on each other to stand upright. Between the FBI, the mob, Hollywood, those at the airfield, and Howard Hughes, each one wouldn't be as significant to the plot if not for influence from one of the others. None of these have anything to do with spectacle or being a summer blockbuster. They have everything to do with good writing, however. That may not be the target of a movie with a summer release, but it's a choice that stands the test of time 30 years later. Speaking of time, I think it's about time I wrap things up. Please forgive me for not going more in depth into the specifics of The Rocketeer. Although it's been 30 years and this is a retrospective, I make these videos both for the familiar as well as the unfamiliar. And just like my other videos, I hope that those who haven't seen The Rocketeer get enough out of this to gain interest to discover it for themselves, without blatant spoilers. I also hope, while we're talking about time, the time of The Rocketeer doesn't dissuade you, if you haven't seen it. Whether it be a movie from the early 90s, or being set in the 30s, The Rocketeer should still engage you, even if you're unfamiliar with either era. I'm confident in saying that, because the hook of The Rocketeer lies in its childhood sense of adventure. And although I may be biased having seen this initially as a child, 30 years later, it still captures the wholesome sense of innocent adventure. So as we look back 30 years later, let's celebrate how well this aged, despite its box office numbers. And although it may not be considered a staple of the Disney brand, both now and then, The Rocketeer has a lot going for it to warrant mention. Its upbeat spirit may not be aligned with today's movies, or even culture, which is more reason to talk about it now. Like Peter Pan, its sense of youthful wonder and adventure is something we've lost as we've gotten older. And I'd be willing to bet I'm not alone in seeing this in The Rocketeer. If I'm correct in that assessment, then perhaps the elements that work well in a movie are those that transcend time, even 30 years later.